As a teenager in the 1930s, Jimmy Culpan had a job taking supplies and mail to the bushmen working in the hills behind Katikati. The Kauri Timber Company was cutting kauri at the headwaters of the Tuapiro River and used kauri dams to float logs down to the mill at the end of Woodland Road. Twice a week, Jimmy collected supplies from the mill and led his horses, Bess and Car, up a winding and often muddy pack track to the bush camp. Only on the way home could he ride one of the horses. The mural is based on a photograph taken by Tudor Collins, well known for his photographs of kauri logging. His brother Bert was mill manager for the timber company. On the left of the mural is the camp boss with another bushman, Jack Dusevich, behind the horses. 3 timber mills operated in the district. One, owned in turn by Bond Brothers and Judd, and then by Cashmore Brothers only, had a tram line from the bush to Diggleman's Point. The timber was conveyed from there by boat to Auckland, and on the way the boatmen used to call in at the little island of Tutaituku and collect oysters for sale in Auckland. The boats returned by way of the Bowentown Bar, bringing manure and goods. The other mill, owned in turn by Knight and McGlashan, used to mill timber near the Waitingawai, Kukupu and Wairua rivers, tributaries of the Tuapiro. Big dams were put up on the rivers, and at flood time the dams were tripped and the logs carried down to the mills where booms caught them. A tram line went across Stamford Flat, halfway between Athenry and Katikati, and scows called there to collect the timber. Otherwise it was conveyed by tram line to Waihi. The rails were wooden and the trams horse-drawn. The Waihi timber yard was a big one, for there was a great demand for timber. The letters KDV stood for kiln dried veneer, which was a process that had been developed and was being used in the manufacture of furniture, and was a subsidiary of an Auckland company. The mill itself was located at Ongare Point and opened in 1946, and was a very substantial investment to the owners. It was thought that they only ever cut pine trees from Matakana. Kauri gum was also obtained in the Katikati district. Mr. Bert Middlebrook was employed as a youth by the local storeman at 10 shillings a week to take supplies by pack horse to the Māori and Dalmatian gum diggers in the bush. Then he could bring back the gum. When Europeans first arrived in New Zealand, kauri trees grew in abundance from the Kaimai Ranges to the far north, covering some 1.2 million hectares. Although Māori used kauri and kauri gum, no significant impact on the resource occurred until the late 1700s, when British vessels were sent to New Zealand to obtain spars for sailing ships. By the 1830s, it was being sawn into boards for export in the local market. In 1903, 340,000 cubic metres was milled, approximately 40% of it being exported. Much of the timber used in the reconstruction of San Francisco after 1905 earthquake and fire was kauri imported from New Zealand. Kauri logging was New Zealand's first major land-based export industry, excluding whaling and sealing, and remained our leading export for almost 50 years. Consequently, associated technologies such as the driving dams are an important historic element of one of our pioneers. Kauri was the most sought-after wood until the early 1900s. A Melbourne-based syndicate, the Kauri Timber Company, dominated the industry from 1888. It bought the rights to hundreds of thousands of acres of kauri forest, along with many sawmills. The kauri timber industry peaked about 1905, but as kauri became scarce, its rising value made it even more desirable. Gangs of bushmen felled trees using axes and 2-man cross-cut saws. A scarf, a wedge-shaped cut, was chopped in the trunk on the side where the tree was expected to fall. The tree was then sawn through from the other side. Usually trees were cut singly, but a skilled bushman could fell several at a time in a drive. He did this by chopping scarfs in a line of trees up a hill and then felling the highest tree, which took down the others like a row of dominoes. Trees were sawn into logs before being taken to the mill. During this process, the logs were moved using the timber jack, a New Zealand adaptation of a screw jack. Teams of bullocks hauled logs to the mill, and in rugged areas, chutes, rolling and skidding roads and bush tramways were used. Driving dams helped float kauri, the only buoyant native timber, down rivers. When water was released from behind the dam, the logs cascaded downstream with it. Getting logs to the coast was a challenge. Water, released from behind dams, was used to drive logs down to tramways or river mouths. The steep catchments, fast-flowing rivers and V-shaped valleys of the ranges lent themselves to the use of such dams. The largest kauri alive today is named Tāne Mahuta and is located in the Waipoua forest in Northland. It has a diameter of 4.6 metres and a height of 52 metres. It is estimated at between 1,200 and 2,000 years old. However, this pales in comparison to the giants felled by early pioneers or otherwise destroyed. The largest kauri tree ever reliably measured was Kairaru of Tuatumoi, with the diameter of 6.4 metres and a height of 65 metres. Other trees are thought to have been even larger, including one at Mercury Bay, which was supposedly had a circumference of 23.77 metres and a height of 24.3 metres to the first branch, twice the bulk of Tāne Mahuta. The elasticity of kauri timber and the length of the tree's trunk made it well suited for ship hulls. Numerous schooners and cutters were built in small shipbuilding yards in the Hauraki Gulf and on the Coromandel Peninsula, before larger yards in Auckland and at Mahurangi took over in the 1870s. Kauri was also used for building houses and in mines. Kauri gum had a number of uses, including making varnish. The first gum diggers in Hauraki were Māori displaced by the wars of the 1860s who worked swamps and river flats before moving on to forests. Local Māori landowners also participated. Europeans joined them later in the century. These hardy workers used fire to clear the land of vegetation and until the practice was banned, bled trees, making cuts in the trunk to gain the gum within rather than retrieving it from swamps or the base of trees. The kauri timber industry used trees wastefully with little heed to forest regeneration. Felling and extraction of trees inevitably damaged smaller trees and saplings. Use of only the lower trunk meant wastage of the huge crown. Up to 30% of logs were lost in dam drives. The use of fire to clear ground for gum digging and farmland destroyed any chance of forest regeneration. Liberal timber regulations worked against the conservation of a resource that takes a long time to grow. Today, kauri forest covers a tiny fraction of the area it once did, but protection of native forests and planting schemes will one day see the return of the giants of the forest. However, kauri are under great threat from a new disease, PTA, which infects and kills the trees. So far, the disease has not been detected in the Coromandel and the Kaimais, but it is spreading in Auckland and Northland. Rigorous hygiene and shoe cleaning by forest users is needed to combat its spread through contaminated soil.